Good morning. It's Wednesday, January 7th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 824 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back yet again to the FDD Morning Brief. We continue to track the news out of South America, and yes, the drama is really quite something to behold. But no surprise, I'm looking eastward. I'm watching how all of this is playing out in the Middle East. One thing that has really not received enough attention is the way in which the collapse of the Maduro regime is impacting Iran. The regime was already reeling from the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria, and now they've just lost another ally in Venezuela. For you math-challenged political science types trying to keep up at home, that's two regimes that Iran once counted on for trade, defense, and diplomacy, and they're both gone or maybe just on life support. It must be lonely these days for the Islamic Republic. More on that in about as much time as it takes to bust down the doors of the presidential palace in Caracas. Today's guest is Carine Hajjar. She's an opinion journalist at the Washington Post, and she's now a repeat offender on this program. She last joined us back when she was still at the Boston Globe. Now she's just about a swamp creature. Haha. We'll talk about that, I guess, soon as well. Oh, and she's a former FDD media fellow. Carine, who's of Lebanese descent, closely tracks developments in Lebanon. But recently, she's been digging into Venezuela and what the fallout from Maduro's capture could mean for U.S. policy on Iran and beyond. Stay tuned for that conversation coming up in just a few. The Iran protests continue, including a sit-in at the Grand Bazaar in Tehran. And I got to say, I'm a little giddy. I'm not saying I'm happy that Iran has been run into the ground by a bunch of kleptocratic clerics. I'm not saying I like the reported 35 deaths or the 1,200 arrests resulting from the regime crackdown. And I'm definitely not saying I celebrate the lack of water or electricity or economic opportunity. That's all really depressing. But I am pleased that the people of Iran are once again standing up to their oppressors. And I'm thrilled the United States is voicing its support for once. Yes, that was a swipe at former U.S. President Barack Obama, who failed to back the Iranian people back in 2009. We could have done the right thing more than 15 years ago when Iranians came out in droves to protest the regime's rigged elections. Fast forward to the current protests. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian is signaling that the regime is losing control. He said during a televised speech that the government can't be expected to quell the unrest alone. To that I say, hell yes. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei may be planning to flee to Russia if his security loses control. Do svidaniya. Pezeshkian has called on security forces not to shoot the protesters, and Iran's military chief is now threatening both America and Israel. It's all chaotic, but one thing is clear. We'll keep cheering on the brave Iranians who are showing the world how to fight for one's freedom. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, 5 years after the Abraham Accords, Israel and Morocco are still going strong. Earlier this week, the two countries wrapped up the third Israel-Morocco Joint Military Committee meeting in Tel Aviv. The convening included visits to IDF units, defense industry, and other security organizations. And it culminated with the signing of a joint action plan for 2026. Officials involved in the meeting said discussions focused on strategic planning, technological innovation, operational readiness, and joint training. The main event was a strategic forum. The focus there was long-term capacity building and coordination. The upshot is that Morocco isn't just an Abraham Accords signatory in name. It's becoming one of Israel's most important Arab allies and partners. The country took a lot of heat during these past 2 years, but it also didn't waver. The Israelis appreciate that, even if you don't hear it often enough in the media. Israeli officials said the meeting this week was, quote, another milestone in deepening a partnership central to regional stability. That's a quote. You got to take your good news from the Middle East anywhere you can get it, folks. I'll take more whenever you got it. Headline 2, over in Paris, Syria and Israel resumed security talks, and it looks like they might have actually made a breakthrough. Discussions began on Monday with White House envoy Tom Barrack serving as mediator. In the run-up to the Paris talks, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appointed a new negotiating team led by Israel's ambassador to the U.S., Yechiel Leiter, acting national security advisor Gil Reich, and incoming Mossad chief Roman Goffman also reportedly participated. Foreign Minister Assad al-Shabani from Syria was running point for Damascus alongside Syrian intelligence chief Hussein al-Salama. The end goal is a security agreement between Israel and Syria to resolve the tensions that have been simmering at the border and in southern Syria since the fall of Bashar al-Assad in December of 2024. And as of last night, it looks like they reached some kind of a deal. I'm not sure I love what I've seen about the deal so far. But then again, I'm not sure I love the regime in Syria. But we'll be watching closely as new details emerge, and we'll report back with developments. Headline 3, Gideon Sar has landed in Somaliland. Down in Africa, Israel's foreign minister touched down in Somaliland for the first official visit since Israel recognized this territory as a government on December 26th. This wasn't just a first official Israeli visit to Somaliland. It's the first time any foreign minister has visited Somaliland in more than 3 decades. So in other words, the first time since Bill Clinton was elected president, and the cost of a newspaper was 25 cents. Sar landed in Somaliland yesterday. He was greeted at the airport by a group of senior officials before meeting with Somaliland's president, foreign minister, presidential affairs minister, and chief of staff. This was an historic visit that does more than just recognize a territory that should, by all accounts, become the 194th state at the UN. If Israel plays its cards right, Somaliland could take in Gaza refugees, and the country could potentially provide an airbase for Israel to tackle that Houthi threat in Yemen. That's some serious proximity right there. And maybe also disrupt some of Turkey's aggressive military action in the Horn of Africa that is increasingly a strategic region for a bunch of bad actors. So some serious strategery all around on the part of Israel, folks. I'm eager to see how it all plays out. Oh, and quick headline 4, and I'm just waking up to this one. The Attorney General of Texas has filed a legal brief against American Muslims for Palestine, AMP. For those who need a quick refresher, this is the group that spawned Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP, that group of student thugs that have been protesting and rioting on college campuses for the last 2 years. AMP has a checkered past, to put it mildly. So stay tuned for more. For now, I'm just going to say, don't mess with Texas. All right, it's time to bring on Carine Hajjar of the Washington Post. Without further ado, let's welcome her back onto the program. Welcome to the FTD Morning Brief, Carine Hajjar.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, tell us real quick about this new move you're making. You're going to be a swamp creature. I get to make fun of you.
I am. I knew this would be my fate one day, but I'm finally making the move down to DC. And yeah, just thrilled to be at the Post, part of the editorial board's mission to promote free markets and personal liberties. And we've been focusing a lot on the Middle East. We've been focusing a lot on Venezuela lately. So it's just been a fun onboarding process, really exciting onboarding process.
Well, I'm excited for you. I know it's been a long road. I've been watching your career. It makes me really happy to see this. Let's get to some of the news. I mean, look, you've been watching the Maduro affair, this episode, this incident, whatever we're calling it. It's not regime change yet, but it might be. What does this mean for Hezbollah, specifically in Latin America, where they have a significant base?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And this sort of ties into the big question mark of this entire debacle that's going on right now in Venezuela, which is just what happens next and who takes power. I think something important to remember is that the guys with the guns, meaning Diosdado Cabello and Vladimir Padrino, they're still in Venezuela. They are the ones who sort of are in charge of all the people with guns, also the repressive apparatus that exists in Venezuela, the armed colectivos, motorcycle gangs that go around terrorizing people. And they have a lot of power with, obviously the military, the police and all of that. But it's going to be hard to see any systemic change in Venezuela, to the corruption, to the cooperation with adversaries, not just Hezbollah, but their patrons, Iran, China, Russia, the Cubans, until we know exactly what's going to happen with all of the bad guys that remain in power in Venezuela. And so I'll be watching anxiously to see how the president deals with Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, who I guess is now technically the president. Illegitimate, I will mention. Maduro lost his election, held on to power, so the same goes for his vice president, obviously. But, she's a dyed-in-the-wool socialist. Her dad was a Marxist guerrilla member and leader. So it's going to be a tricky moving forward. But you mentioned earlier that my family, I have Lebanese heritage, but my mom's side of the family is part of the was part of the Lebanese diaspora in Venezuela. So We've been watching very anxiously over the past 2 decades. And as more cooperation has gone on with Iran, and obviously Iran's proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, but especially Hezbollah wreaking havoc in Lebanon and also in Venezuela. So this was just a big day of Maduro's fall was a day of justice. Obviously, what happens next is tricky.
Yeah, and when we look at Venezuela, it's been a transit point for a lot of the illicit activity that Hezbollah is involved in the tri-border area, right? And that sort of deep, lawless jungle area where they've been
Right.
counterfeiting goods and they've been moving drugs and moving weapons, and it's been a huge source of funding for Hezbollah, and that obviously is going to be potentially a gut punch to the party of God, as they call themselves.
Right.
But so now let's just talk briefly. I mean, you mentioned Iran and what this might mean for them. I mean, this was a state partner. I mean, I was mentioning at the top of the program that, the Iranians lost Assad in Syria. Now looks like they've lost Maduro in Venezuela. So that's two allies down in like the course of 13 months. How do you see this playing out for Iran? Did they really need Venezuela for something crucial, or was this just a partnership of convenience?
It's hard to say. I mean, this is all a part of their bigger strategy to undermine the West. I mean, they're pretty transparent about it, right? And no better way to do that than be right in America's backyard, helping with weapons, drones with the Venezuelans, trading oil, and they both. We know in 2022 there was the pact between the Iranians and the Venezuelans that they were collaborating to sort of skirt U.S. sanctions and water down their power. I was really glad to see, even before Maduro's extraction, that President Trump started going after Venezuelan oil tankers, and I hope that they keep that up. That is, they have been flaunting our sanctions consistently for years, but we should also take the same approach with Iran. There's plenty of illegal tankers making their way around the world, trying to get around U.S. policy, and I think that trying to target those would be really helpful, especially now as Iranians are bravely taking to the streets and demanding better from their regime. And it's going to be interesting. I think, like, if you're an Iranian protester right now and you're struggling to put food on the table, and the government is saying, let us give you $7 a month to help tide you over, which is what they're offering. It's hard to imagine that two of your leader's big allies, both Venezuela and in Syria, as you mentioned, those partnerships have fallen away. In the meantime, while people are starving and trying to find water, thanks to, again, Iranian government mismanagement, you're trying to funnel $1 billion over the last year to Hezbollah and Lebanon. You got to be asking yourself, what is this all for? What is the point of this axis of resistance if I can't eat or put food on the table for my own family?
Yeah, and I think that's the message, and I think that's why more pressure is going to be needed. And I think tankers, right, that's a great way of doing it. More support for the people. I'd like to see some money being put into the pockets of the protesters. We'll have to think about exactly how that happens. But man, would it be great to give them a strike fund right now to allow them to continue to put food on the table while they continue to go out into the streets and while the regime is still reeling. But I want to ask you kind of maybe a wider Middle East question, or a wider question about all of these bad actors that America has been locking horns with. I mean, it's got to be pretty jarring right now. I mean, we haven't seen really a regime change per se. I mean, the regime technically is still in place, but the leader of the Venezuelan regime is gone, right? He's facing justice now in New York. The Middle East has some trauma from this, right? I mean, they remember when the United States was in the regime change game. This was back during the Bush administration, right? We toppled the Iraqi government, the Afghanistan government. What do you think the Middle East is thinking right now as they're looking out? And by the way, also some of these other bad actors in Latin America, it's got to be kind of a moment where everybody's thinking, is Trump going to come for us? Is that kind of your read?
I think that big picture, just zooming out all the way to the highest level, this was an important move to reestablish the credibility of the U.S. deterrent, because you had, over the Obama administration, over the Biden administration especially, we kept letting our red lines be trampled over and over again, and especially when it came to Iran, we gave them easy deals. Under Biden particularly, we were going to give them basically a glide path to a nuclear weapon with very few downsides. The only downsides for us, luckily, that deal never came to fruition. But I think that they were learning that they could do whatever they want. In the meantime, they're funneling billions to Hezbollah, Hamas, and sort of laying the groundwork for a lot of the crises that we've been seeing play out in the Middle East. So the President Trump gave Maduro a 1 week deadline. I believe it was sometime in November, and he gave Maduro amazing deals over and over again. Go to your estate in Moscow. Go live in luxury in Minsk. Go join your comrades somewhere else. Instead, he chose to stick around, and that was crossing the U.S. red line. On top of that, these are just the Venezuelans were working with bad actors. They are a security concern in our hemisphere and in our backyard. So I think that following through on those red lines and making sure that Maduro sees justice was incredibly important. Now, that doesn't mean that the path ahead is necessarily going to be smooth or clear. And I think that's where you get a lot of fair questions about regime change. And you're certainly hearing this from a lot of the protesters I've come across. But something I've been thinking a lot about is the regime change in places in the Middle East is a bit different. Again, the U.S. government has not committed to straight up regime change right now in Venezuela. It's still unclear exactly what we're going to be doing, but people have to remember that the Venezuelan population is a bit different from some of these similar operations we've seen in the Middle East. They remember prosperity. They remember general democracy. I visited Venezuela a few times over my life when I was younger. We had to stop going. But, as it was declining throughout the Chavez era, but people are still alive that remember before, and also remember when their vote counted. So I think that makes this a little different, and we shouldn't totally lose hope yet.
Yeah, I do think it's important not to conflate the Middle East with what's happening in our own hemisphere. And actually that brings me to some of the protests that you've been watching. And I want to hear about what you've been seeing. The protests here in the US where people have been, I guess, pro and against this move by Trump. I understand the controversy surrounding it. I understand the kind of, the similarities that people are trying to draw, when they think about regime change. You hear some of the isolationists out there saying the US should not do any of this. Others that are saying that it's about time. So what are the themes that you're picking up as you hear these protests?
The general theme I've seen, well, I'll start with the one in Times Square, which was the day after Maduro was extracted. And, I'm sure a lot of your viewers have seen and listeners have seen the videos of jubilance and joy coming out of the Venezuelan diaspora around the world. And that really has been the Venezuelan response. But in Times Square, a bunch of socialists gathered to talk about how I heard people saying that we should free Maduro, that Maduro and Chavez were exemplary leaders and they were fighting for justice, and that the only struggle that they had and the only reason that the Venezuelan people were struggling was because of U.S. sanctions. Of course, that's foolish, and U.S. sanctions were in response to those bad actors. But this is just like a reflexive, it's a reflexive instinct to side with whoever says they are the resistance. That's why you can see it in both the context of the Middle East and being pro-Hamas, also seeing it in this context being pro-Maduro. Maduro simply, in these people's mind, is part of the resistance against the West and also the U.S. I mean, I was hearing chants, against U.S. imperialism, etc. The few Venezuelans that walked by that protest just happened to be in the area. We're chanting USA, we're praising the U.S. government, and we're thrilled that Maduro had fallen. I mean, they're very clear-eyed about the challenges that are coming ahead. They don't think that this is necessarily automatically going to go well, but they see this as justice served for a criminal and somebody who has terrorized their population for years. And then I was also at the arraignment outside of the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. And there you did have an organized Venezuelan demonstration. And really, I should say it was a celebration. People were dancing, singing. And Venezuelan culture is very joyful. They just haven't really had a chance to be joyful in a really long time. So it was beautiful to be there and see it. And then on the other side, they were sort of separated because it was getting a little heated. You had, again, the same anti-American crowd. Socialists literally telling me next to Venezuelans that these Venezuelans don't know what's good for them. They need Maduro leadership. And that's quite sad to see. And I think overall points to a big failure in the education of a lot of young people, because it was a lot of young people out there
Yeah.
praising Chavez and Maduro.
Well, and that's a theme, right? I'm sure these same people have been, praising Hamas and Iran and Hezbollah since the war began in the Middle East on October 7th of 2023. I mean, I got to say, look, I'm a big fan of free speech. I'll defend everyone's free speech to the end. I've been sued on grounds of free speech. But I got to tell you, when you look at what's going on right now, the people that are unhappy about what Trump just did, right? We're talking about, the regime in Venezuela, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the Cubans, right? And then the people that are happy about this are the Venezuelans. And right, I mean, the people of the region. So I got to say, I mean, let people protest all they want, but I think you can pretty much see how things are shaking out right now. This is a net positive. It doesn't mean that it's going to work out perfectly in the end with, whatever comes after Maduro. But I got to say, if you judge this based on how our enemies are reacting, I feel pretty good about it.
Absolutely.
Okay, I got one more question for you, Carine, before I let you go. I know you follow Lebanon closely. This has been a pretty crucial time for Lebanon, right? I mean, Hezbollah has been weakened since 2024. Since that Grim Beeper operation and the liquidation of Hassan Nasrallah. And since then, the terror group has been on the rocks. It's been on the ropes. It's probably cut down to 25% of its strength, but it's not leaving, right? And the government has been it's been tasked by the United States to remove Hezbollah. The Israelis want this too. I mean, it's kind of ironic. The Israelis are probably the biggest proponents of Lebanese sovereignty other than the Lebanese people right now. And yet we don't seem to be moving in the right direction. So what's happening here? What's your assessment of what's happening in Lebanon?
Yeah, we had an editorial out recently that talked about the unfinished business in the Middle East, and Lebanon is one of them, one of the issues that is definitely unfinished. And you had the Lebanese government officials promise to have disarmament of south of the Litani River, closest bordering with Israel, that whole area disarmed by the end of the year. Recently, I believe it was the foreign minister who said those operations were supposed to end by the end of the year, but they're ongoing. So we know that process is probably not done, because Israel continues to strike at what they tell us are Hezbollah targets in the south. I think most recently there was a huge strike in the southern city of Sidon. So these are signs that disarmament isn't done yet. The Lebanese are not moving quickly enough. But I always like to zoom out and remind folks that they are operating in an incredibly delicate environment as well. Hezbollah still has. We've talked. You've seen a lot of folks in the media sort of celebrating Hezbollah's demise. And it's true, they have been weakened, and that's a huge victory for both Israel and the US. But they still exist. And more importantly, they have strong political support from the Shiite community in Lebanon. They provide a lot of humanitarian aid, a lot of these types of social services, and that maintains their support. So politically, that's a challenge for the Lebanese government. Also, coming up in May are parliamentary elections. And so this is going to be another issue for the Lebanese government as they move ahead, thinking about disarmament heading into those huge elections. And lastly, and this is the most important, and it's more of a sort of psychological, deep-rooted fear of civil war. The Lebanese government want to move extremely carefully, and in this case, they're moving too slowly and too carefully because they don't want to spark a sort of internal conflict. So we saw this play out in the South. The Israelis and the Americans have been urging more aggressive disarmament, and that sometimes means going into private homes and raiding private homes. There was a point where the Lebanese army said, "We're not going to do that." It was just too visceral of a sort of attack, and they've been staying on the outskirts. And that's why you've been seeing the Israelis striking at different facilities, homes, buildings, continue to strike in the South. The big question mark is moving forward in the North. I want to see them disarm the South first. I want to see that they can do that. Moving into the North is going to be even trickier. If Israel has to step in, they still are striking outside of the South. I think on Monday they were striking in the east of the country. That's going to be a political issue for a lot of Lebanese, including Lebanese who are against Hezbollah but are just tired of war. So, I'm hopeful because the Lebanese government continues to say we have to disarm Hezbollah. On Thursday, they're having conversations in the government, and they'll get an update from the Lebanese armed forces about where that's headed, and I'll be watching anxiously. But the political challenges will be great moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, I fear that they overlearned the lessons of the 1980s, and that right now,
Yes.
the big lesson is, don't let another country occupy you like Iran. And again, they've got the Israelis on their side. They've got the Americans on their side. We'll keep watching. I want to thank you, Carine Hajjar, for joining us today. Good luck at the new gig, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for joining us on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thanks.
All right. Good to see her moving onward and upward. Here's what FDD has on tap for you today. My colleague Behnan Bentalabu has an amazing new piece in the Free Press on Iran's ongoing protests and how they differ from past uprisings in the aftermath of the 12-day war. It is clear to Iranians that the regime is banged up and that the Ayatollah's power is waning. So the people are seizing the moment. A full-scale revolution may be on the horizon, folks. Inshallah is all I can say. Meanwhile, on the latest episode of FDD's Foreign Policy, host Cliff May, our supreme leader, is joined by Bashir Goth, Somaliland's representative to the United States, to discuss Israel's recognition of the republic's sovereignty. Could this anti-Islamist, pro-peace Muslim government be next to join the Abraham Accords? I don't know if it matters so much, but I will say, learn about this country, or this almost country. It's a fascinating discussion. Highly recommend it. Foreign Policy. Finally, if you haven't heard enough from me today, I wrote a piece for the New York Post on Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro's capture by the United States while taking down the head of a narco state responsible for widespread drug trafficking and American deaths was obviously a key goal. The operation also sends a broader message. The U.S. is reasserting its influence in the Western Hemisphere and signaling to our foes, which just happens to be Maduro's friends, that we're not to be messed with. Here's looking at you, Cuba, Russia, China, and all the other thugs out there. All right, time to stick a fork in it, folks, because we're done. If you're looking for some smart things to read, check out the expert analysis on our website, fdd.org. Catch our quick takes across our socials, and please consider kicking off 2026 with a generous tax-deductible donation. You can do that, as always, at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Friday for another edifying episode of your favorite morning show. Until then, have a happy Wednesday. I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.